Joining us first on the program this evening is Najam Sethi, the chief editor of the Friday Times. He also has his own television show in Pakistan and is one of Pakistan's most respected journalists. Mr. Sethi, thank you so much for being with us. Well, explain to us what exactly is going on. The opposition motion has been tabled today, but also a shot in the arm for Imran Khan, isn't it? With a key ally that had turned against him, now possibly voting in his favor. What does this mean?
Yes, well, this is a last-minute development. Until a few hours ago, it seems as though the opposition had stitched it all up, especially since this morning the resolution for the vote of no confidence was carried through quite smoothly. And we were now ticking the clock for the next 7 days when the voting would take place. But today, a couple of hours ago, one key ally, as you point out, Chaudhry Parvez Ali of the Q League, has bolted. Imran Khan invited him over to Banigala and offered him the chief ministership. And he has 5 votes which are critical when the count comes down in Islamabad in 7 days' time. And there is another ally which has 7 votes. Those two are critical. The opposition will need about 10, 12 votes to overthrow Imran. And these 7 and 5 are very critical. 5 are now, apparently, the leader of the 5 has said that they will vote with Imran. And in return, he's offered them the chief ministership of Punjab. The people in Karachi, the MQM, have 7 votes. The Imran has called them over and is about to offer them the governorship of Karachi. So there's speculation that they too may bolt and may go back, as it were, to Imran Khan. In which case, then, there will be a serious numbers issue as far as the opposition is concerned. That's the bad news. The good news for the opposition is that 5 members from Balochistan have just announced their support for the opposition. So they are now plus 5. They need another 7. And there's another news that's coming in, which is that the Q League is split. The people who are joining Imran Khan have split. And so things are very much out in the open. It may be that even in the worst case scenario, if 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 members from Imran Khan's own party cross the floor, and right now, at least a dozen of them have said that they have openly, publicly said they're going to cross the floor. In that case, Imran is a goner again. So it's going to be a very touch and go, as it were. There's still 7 days to go, and a lot of these people can come and go. So we're going to keep the clock ticking, and excitement will continue to grow.
Well, South Asian politics is always exciting. But irrespective of the numbers, Najam Sahab, how does this play out if the army, which is all powerful in Pakistan, is less than pleased with Imran Khan, as seems to be the case here?
Yes, well, I mean, that's the big multi-million-dollar question. The army has distanced itself from Imran for very, very strong reasons, and we can go into those in a separate question. And right now they're saying we are neutral. Imran has been attacking them indirectly by saying there's no such thing as neutrality. You've got to stand in this battle between good and evil and morality and immorality. You've got to stand with me. And they've stepped back. They've basically said, we've had enough. We've been supporting you, propping you up. Now we're getting a bad name because your government is both corrupt and incompetent. And people are angry. And so therefore we can't afford to be seen to be propping you up all over again. You're on your own now. Fend for yourself. The opposition smelled that this was a great opportunity and they've thrust the knife in. So that's where we are right now. If the establishment retains its neutrality, quote unquote, then Imran is gone. If the establishment steps up to help Imran again, and all they need to do is make a few phone calls to people who are thinking of going to Imran's side, they'll come back. And on the other hand, if they keep quiet, that will be taken to mean by the opposition at least that, well, they don't mind whatever we do. They are not ready to help Imran. So, you know, it's all going to be touch and go. The speculation here is that all these comings and goings will continue. And until the last day, we will not know which way the pendulum will swing.
How did Imran Khan, though, go from being the blue-eyed boy of the army to this, where he seems to have fallen out with the army chief?
Yes, it's not just the army chief. Actually, he's fallen out with the core leadership of the army. And there are 3 reasons for that. The first is that when they brought him in, they genuinely believed that he would be able to deliver. He's a modern man, educated, young people with him, amenable to the idea of bringing experts in, and so on and so forth. And so they thought, you know, we are going to be propping up a winner, even though they helped him come in with a bit of rigging here and there and so on. Number one, he's disappointed them on that count. In 4 years, he's made things worse. He's been a terrible administrator. And what has happened is that Imran has brought a bad name to himself, but he's in the process, the army's got it in the neck. They are the ones who brought him in, and people have now started saying that, what's the point of attacking Imran? The guys who propped him up, the guys who brought him in, they should be held responsible. So the whole hybrid regime experiment that the establishment brought forward, thinking that this would bail out the whole political system and the economy and everything else, has collapsed. So they're embarrassed because now the attack is coming, the anger of the masses is turned against the establishment. And that's never happened before. And this is happening in Punjab province. 70% of the army's rank and file come from Punjab. So you can imagine how distressed they are that they have had to bear the brunt of Imran's incompetence. And on top of that, the big thing, the big item on Imran Khan was that he's not corrupt. He will run a clean ship. Unfortunately, that's not happened. Punjab is full of stories of corruption, some involving the First Lady. This is the level of allegations. And the army has been telling Imran to get rid of your chief minister in Punjab, put up a good ship. It's very important. Punjab is 55% of Pakistan. And you've got to run a good ship there. And that's been the worst administered province. That was the first thing. The second thing was, and he refused to do that. The second thing was they wanted a change in the ISI. Because they thought that the then ISI chief that had propped up Imran Khan, they thought he'd gone a bit too far in propping up a candidate who wasn't delivering. And they wanted a change in the army's ISI. And Imran said no, because he was depending on that particular general to keep bailing him out. And now, this is a very sensitive issue. It's an army post. And the army doesn't like it being taken over by a prime minister who then gets the ISI to do his political bidding. So that was the second thing. They wanted a change in command. Imran refused. Dragged his feet for 6 months. Embarrassed the army no end. Eventually he gave in, but then by the time he'd given in, there'd been a lot of bad blood. So that was the second thing. And the third was that Imran was thinking, has been thinking for some time, that he will change the army chief and bring in a more pliant army chief. And this army chief was very pliant. But the fact that he couldn't take the pressure from his own colleagues who said, look, we've got to step back. He's hurting the institution. So now there's been this unwritten tension between the army chief and his colleagues and Imran. So there's been these three reasons why they stepped back. They're not helping the opposition, but they're not propping up the government anymore, which has led to this confusion and what you see happening in Pakistan today.
Well, obviously here in India, we're watching this story very closely, Najam Saab. And what do you think the implications would be for India-Pakistan ties that have been largely frozen for the last few years? And a lot of that has to do with Imran Khan's rhetoric against India and the government here. So what happens if he goes?
Well, you see, let's look at it like this. If the Prime Minister stays, there's no chance of India-Pakistan relations improving. In fact, he's using anti-India rhetoric as part of his populist plank, just as he's using anti-Americanism and the religious card to whip up public sentiment in his favor. So clearly, he doesn't really much care about what happens to Pakistan's foreign policy, what happens to relations in the neighborhood and so on. He's whipping up a lot of prejudices in the country, especially amongst the urban middle classes. And so therefore, if Imran stays, I do not think for a minute that there will be any improvement in India-Pakistan relations. On the other hand, if you recall, the army has been gently pressing him to normalize. It's been telling him that we need to normalize with India, we need to normalize with Afghanistan, we need to normalize with the Americans. Because we trade with the West and we aid and we get their loans and so on. We need to be, more sensitive and more appreciative, especially since India is now going into the American camp. We can't afford that. We've got to stay close to the ground, as it were. Imran has been making anti-American statements. Imran has been making anti-India statements. And of course, this disquiet. Don't forget, it was the army that negotiated the ceasefire, which has still continued to hold. And the army is keen on focus on the economy, geoeconomics, not geostrategy. Stitch up your relationship with everybody else. Forget about jihad. Let's focus on doing good for this country now. Let's not get into wars all over again. Imran is actually not buying this. He's going the other way. This is originally Nawaz Sharif's agenda. And the army used to derail this agenda in the old days. Now the army has come around to the thing, the economy is collapsing. We need to stitch up our relationship and become a normal country, or as much as possible a normal country, especially in the neighborhood. And Imran is not playing ball.
All right. Well, interesting days ahead. Najam Sethi, always a pleasure to talk to you, sir.